morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this panel on the pitfalls and opportunities of publishing in the internet age. This panel was convened upon the realization that ICTs have opened up vast opportunities for social science research publishing, and particularly that the internet sees a lot of activity with regard to social science publishing in this era and age. And yet, at the same time, we do realize that asymmetries definitely inform knowledge production and dissemination. And so the questions that this panel seeks to address are: what are the opportunities for social science publishing as well as knowledge production that is aided by the internet? What constraints are evinced? And do we glean any possibilities towards the closing of the digital gap between the global north and the south with regard to knowledge production, and also therefore knowledge gap, consumption gap between the south and the global north possibly being closed? We have quite a number of speakers this morning, a total of 7. And so I'm going to be asking our speakers to speak for about 10 minutes, no more than 12, to allow for a conversation to flow. Our speakers, of course, bring to this panel their expertise, their knowledge, and their experience with respect to these issues. They're also a panel that is representative of Africa, Asia, the African diaspora, Europe, Latin America. I want to the perspectives they will be speaking to, and I will introduce each paper as they start. To begin with, a gender perspective, and then an Asian perspective, a view from Asia, and Africa perspective on interrogating the digital divide, social science publishing in the age of the internet, an African perspective, opportunities and challenges of social science journals on the web. That would be a Latin American perspective, and we'll also get an experiential perspective with regard to the International Social Science Journal. Before I introduce my speakers, I want to say a few words on gender itself, which is what I am supposed to be presenting on. But rather than give a fully fledged presentation, what I'm going to be doing really is just speak to a few issues in the manner of just showing possible directions that we can look at with respect to gender publishing of the social sciences and the internet. I want to pick on the example of the Pan-African e-network that was recently launched in February of this year between the government of India and the African Union to link up in an e-network all the African countries to India in what has been termed a true example of South-South collaboration, but also India's aid to Africa, as it were. Now, this Pan-African network connects nodal centers in India with all the 53 countries. The idea is to provide telemedicine and teleeducation, and it started off as a pilot project in Ethiopia in 2007. It is supposed to be working very well. There's skills transfer there that is being effected. There's cooperation and provision of internet video conferencing, supporting e-governance, e-commerce, infotainment, resource mapping, and even meteorological services. And the primary social sectors that it focuses on and generates knowledge on, as well as trains on, are education and health. Now, I'm picking on this in particular because it seems to me that this is something that is informed by what is a perspective that really gender debates and gender politics are anchored on, which is transcendence of borders, where going across borders, partnership is forged, knowledge production then gets to be effected. And so in this crossing of boundaries, one could say we see an instance of African feminism working, where African feminists such as Molara Ogunde talk about STIWA, social transformation that is inclusive of women and men. Basically, the partnering across all kinds of boundaries that generally are effected in life. And so transformation is likely to take place because of this. And the social sectors that, as I said, are themselves addressed in particular by this initiative are health and education. And we know that those two are of particular importance to women and to those that generally are the marginalized groups. Initiatives such as these that are allowed for by the internet and allowed for by ICTs in general also can be associated with other initiatives that allow for women to work together in a quilting manner of work, research, and even stories, where they tell stories about their own lives. I stories, for instance, that as information then that is, as it were, published on the internet gets to inform all of us and possibly lead towards knowledge generation. But also in the form of just form itself. Blogging, for example, is very much a form that follows that of diaries, of even epistolary letters that we know women in general have used over time and ages in order to make sure that they also have their experiences known. And so there are many ways in which I would like to suggest the internet is making work that is gendered, as well as allowing for the production of knowledge that crosses boundaries, gendered and otherwise. But I want to also signal to the fact that while this is the case, there's also the paradoxical side to this, which is that the internet can also be actually dangerous in that misogynistic information can be published on the internet in the guise of knowledge, and used therefore to undermine all the successes of the production of gendered knowledge that, with respect to Africa, has been taking place for the past 40 years or so. And so I am suggesting that even as we celebrate the internet as a tool for allowing for the growth and dissemination of gendered knowledge and of allowing us to cross boundaries, as it were, we should look out for the possibilities that are in existence, are real with respect to the perpetuation of misconceptions about males and females. And so it seems to me that one of the areas that we might want to think about is issues of self-regulation with respect to scholarly spaces on the net that are clearly demarcated, but also digital African information, as well as information from the South, an infrastructure that would seek to protect those that are marginal voices, so that what then the internet presents is more the opportunities and an enabling environment for ensuring that voices from the South, from Africa, and from marginal groups get to be heard, and knowledge production from these sides is enabled properly. Having made these few remarks, I want to now come back to my panel and introduce to you Professor Imtiaz Ahmed. Professor Ahmed is Professor of International Relations at the University of Dhaka. He was educated at Dhaka, Carleton University, Ottawa, and Australian National University, Canberra. He served as the chairperson of the Department of International Relations, Dhaka University, and has been a visiting associate professor at Yokohama City University in Japan. Imtiaz is going to be talking to us about repositioning the social science journal in the age of the internet, a view from Asia.
Thank you, Pinky. Well, one of the reasons I'm here is I co-edit a journal with Codestria. In fact, it's an Afro-Asian journal. It's called Identity, Culture, Politics, an Afro-Asian Dialogue, which was started almost 8 or 10 years back. And the reason why it got started, I guess the story would help you understand that. There was this Afro-Asian dialogue or meeting in Goa way back, 10 years back or even earlier. And Goa, as you know, is a nice, place to roam around, a nice beach and all. And as we were coming back to Delhi, my Nigerian friend, Jibrin Ibrahim, a well-known scholar, suddenly asked me, can you help me buy some DVDs in Delhi? And I said, yes, I'm familiar with Delhi, don't worry. What English movies are you looking for? And he said, no, I'm not looking for any English movies. I'm looking for movies of Shah Rukh Khan. That's a Bollywood. So he was looking for Bollywood. So a Nigerian, asking for Bollywood movies. I thought, wow, that's something. And then he could, in fact, sing a song, some 2 or 3 Hindi song, and more familiar with the heroes and the heroines of the Bollywood. And I thought that's an Afro-Asian dialogue, no doubt, with Bollywood getting kind of a reverse globalization. And we then thought that we need to interact, Asian Africa needs to interact directly and not via the West as we normally do. And so we thought of the journal, in fact, which actually gets reproduced over internet. Myself sitting in Bangladesh, and then we have the current editor is in Madagascar, I think so, right. And the logistics is looked after in Senegal, so you can well imagine. We meet only once a year, though. That's it. But everything is done over internet. And that's how it started. But let me come to my paper, which, as Pinky was referring to, is Repositioning the Social Science Journal in the Age of the Internet and a View from Asia. Now, way back in the Upanishad, a particular Upanishad called Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, way back in 700 BC, there's a fantastic line, a verse, in fact, where for the first time you have the profoundest remark, in fact, of all times. This I regarded, and so did the Nobel laureate Tagore way back. And that is, there is this verse called, and I quote, I verily am the creation. So here is the human, for the first time, referring to himself or herself as I verily am the creation. And that profoundest remark, in fact, tells you that humans wants to be immortal. And there's always a race to remain immortal, in fact. Now, in the other Indian epic called Mahabharata, there was an interesting question by Brahma, in fact, the supreme god. He asked Yudhishthira, one of the personalities, and the question was, he asked him, what is the greatest wonder? And the response was, death strikes each day, but we live as if we were immortal. Now, that tells you, in fact, that this immortality, it is something that is part of what humans are all about. Now, if you look at how things have progressed from a technological point of view, in this quest, you see the stone carvings way back in 800,000 years, 800,000 years ago, and then you have the cave paintings, which is 2,000 years back. Then you have the papyrus in 3rd millennium BC. Then you have the rock edicts in 3rd century BC. You have paper in 2nd century AD. Then you have photography, 19th century, computer, 20th century, and now the internet. So you can see how humans have evolved and the desperate attempt to remain immortal. Now, with internet, the question is whether things have changed in our quest for knowledge. Is it only knowledge production or just dissemination? You know, what does it do, and how does it help in civilizing, if not immortalizing, humans? So these are the questions. In fact, I thought should be in fact flagged in order to understand what we are getting into when we talk about the internet. Now, when we refer to these creative ventures from way back stone carvings to the internet, then immediately the question is, currently at least, the use and misuse of such ventures, because you can use it but also you can misuse it, in fact. And so last 2 days we were tied up with comprehending what social science research is all about. But the question has to be, what about the social science research of OBL, Mr. Osama bin Laden? He also has a social science research. And it seems that at this point of time, he's winning the race, and not the people who are trying to get rid of Mr. OBL. Now, so you have this counter research, and you have this use of the internet equally by groups, way, in fact, creatively than that what we have done. But this is not something only for the internet. Even in the print media, in fact, when the printing came, and I can talk a little bit on the Islamic community and the Muslim community, how they have used or misused the printing, in fact. Now, printing came to the Muslim domain much later, only in 19th century, 400 years after the Christian world. And the reason was the Quran you're supposed to recite. The Quran means recitation, and so oral it was more authentic than writing. And so in 18th century, when the first printing press came in Istanbul, people literally, in fact, got rid of it, in fact, and closed it down forcefully. We don't want any printing press, because to print the Holy Quran was not something that was acceptable. You have to do it orally, and people used to memorize that. And that was, authenticity was from person to person, not from writing to writing. So you have a totally different discourse altogether when it comes to the Islamic domain, and it prevails even today. But in 19th century, and largely because of the colonial legacy, and particularly in the Indian context, in the Indian subcontinent context, in order to get rid of the British, the Muslims for the first time thought that we need to replicate whatever they're trying to do. And so the printing became part of the campaign, in fact. And you had an enormous kind of a rise in printing of the Holy Quran and the books and the Islamic. And then you have this entire scholarship in and around the madrasa. Even the madrasa education earlier on was absolutely from person to person. If you go back to some of the fascinating texts of Shafi's Risala, for example, he's one of the big four Imams, and you will see the in Shafi's Risala, in order to make his statement authentic, he would go from person to person, that this person said, this person said, this person, and then he would say, this is what Prophet said. And so this person to person goes on and on. Now, that changed in the 19th century and in early 20th century. By the time the Deobandis came with more rigid understanding of what Islam is all about, it was printing. And in the Deobandi madrasa, 99 books were prescribed, and that were frozen, in fact. No one could change, and the books became kind of, structured. So what you have here is the discourse, even in the Islamic domain, transformed in a way which I think is remarkable. So I'd like to, in fact, bring the other side of it when we talk about social science, because it can go in both ways. And with respect to the internet, one has to be very careful about that too. Now, when it comes to the journal itself, and I have to skip a lot of things, but when it comes to journal, there are three areas, in fact, one has to look into. One is the issue of accessibility. And we know the internet has deteriorized the world, and so one can go beyond the religion, ethnicity, and culture. One can go beyond that. But if you remember OBL, then the OBL is also trying to do the same kind of a social science research through the internet. So accessibility is not only for the good; the accessibility can also be for the bad, in fact, and that one has to keep in that mind. The second is what I call a location, or the relationship between the global and the local getting globalized. And you have, it's very difficult to know where you are. And I'm sure with internet, all of you are familiar. Unless you want to say where you are, it's impossible to know where you are. You can remain anywhere, and you can just pretend that that you are in the same town, or the person is emailing you. But then with this location, what has happened, and this is I refer to as Googleization of knowledge. And Googleization of knowledge is interesting, and you can try yourself. I work on terrorism, so sometimes I see, okay, what are the latest websites that have come on terrorism, and it's millions, in fact. And if you even spend 1 minute, so your lifetime is gone, in fact. So you have to be very careful as to what you want to get into in this Googleization of knowledge, and everything seems to be very close, but at the same time very far, and we can go into that scenario also during discussion. The last one is the issue of sustainability. Now, this is a technological issue. Now, I still think, the stone carvings, which is 800,000 years old, the sustainability, you can't beat them. In fact, it's still living. Now, the internet one has to be very careful with all the hard drive crash and all, and where do you go? And then, not to mention, you have the ICANN monopolizing the websites and all, and so that's the other issue. I'm sure some of the speakers would be talking on that. So accessibility, location, sustainability are the issues. In fact, when we reposition the social science journal, we have to keep in mind. And for that reason, I think both the soft and the hard print has to be there for a while, unless you end up with something like stone carvings, fix it would remain and make you immortal. Otherwise, just to base yourself thinking that one can get across millions of people and forget about the hard print, I don't think the time has come for that. But given the scenario, humans are capable of X number of things. After all, we are Homo faber and not only Homo sapiens. And so as creative being, I think but the future is open, and I'm sure at times things would change. But at this moment, as I speak, both the dimensions, the print, the hard print and the soft print, ought to be there. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Imtiaz. I'd like to now invite Professor A.P. Zach Williams, Professor of Sociology, who is also President of African Studies Association of the United Kingdom, member of the British Academy Africa Panel, Network Chair of the European Social Science History Conference, and sits too on the editorial board of the International Journal of Africa and Black Diaspora, has been on the board of the International Journal of Social Work, Education, and a member of the African Studies Association of the United States of America. Invite him to speak to us this morning on interrogating the digital divide between the global north and the south, and implications for knowledge production thereof.
Thanks very much. Chair. There's just one little bit I have to correct. I'm the immediate past chair. I'm sure you must have got those things through internet, which points to, I'm immediate past chair. I don't want Ralph to get back to William Bernard and say, Zach is still hugging your chair, your presidency. Thank you very much for that introduction. In fact, I'll start speaking from that because during the period when I was president of the African Studies Association, we became a learned society of the British Academy, and we got some money from the British Academy, and among the conditions was that we should try to encourage Africans to publish in British journals, and secondly, to encourage publishing in Africa. So there are a number of things that we've done. We've met with editors of journals. Incidentally, one other thing you forgot to mentioned. See Rauf was going to jump on that. I'm also on the editorial board of the Review of African Political Economy, and so we've met with editors specifically to deal with these issues. How could we encourage? Because we do get lots and lots of materials from Africa, but often there are one or two problems why we can't publish them. So what we decided, I know we do that on the review, but I know people like JSAS, Journal of Southern African Studies, too, would do that. What we do not reject straight away. We give constructive comments and encourage people to come back, because we know that in Africa, people do not have access to up-to-date books readily. And we know that internet facilities are not as good as in the north. So this is one thing. These are some of the things that we do. But back to the top, to my title. What I've done in this paper is to try to position Africa within the information communication technology age, and look at some of the obstacles to full participation in digital technology, examine how such participation can enhance Africa's development and consolidation for democratic participation and sustainable development. I know I would not be able to give you not even all the salient points in the paper, but just in case, let me just tell you the structure of the paper. I try to define what I mean by the digital divide, and raise question about some of the technological problems in terms of knowledge preservation, and then draw attention to the role of higher education on knowledge control and preservation, and look at the electronic order and rights of citizens, because I think that's also important. And I made some conclusions. So the moment I hear we have something like 2 or 5 minutes, I'll just go straight to the conclusion, which I think might interest you. Okay, so I think one could say that it's a truism that Africa runs the risk of continuing marginalization in the digital revolution. If we consider the digital revolution the second revolution, the second industrial revolution, then it is not patronizing to suggest that Africa has not yet thoroughly embedded the first industrial revolution within its economic and physical infrastructure, because that's where the problem is, the old point about the infrastructure. But we see that, for example, if you look at terrestrial telephone, it's a problem in most African countries, but when it comes to mobile phones, it's incredible how that has been embedded within African mode of communication and culture. Now, so in order to achieve this important goal, African governments will, in my view, will have to abandon the passive role bequeathed to them by the Washington Consensus, the sort of thing Bio was talking about yesterday. African government must follow the example of their counterparts in the tricontinental axis, engaging in strategic intervention in the economy and society. In this way, the African state will signpost its determination to turn its back on neoliberalism and structural adjustment. So, in defining the digital age, one refers to the triumph of information, or ICT, in the post-industrial societies, which has now become the engine for driving globalization. The digital age marked, in my view, the end of Fordist production techniques and the triumph of post-Fordism in the developed world by championing a niche market at the expense of mass market. As post-Fordist production techniques emerged in the developed world, as monopoly capital sought to maximize profit, in the developing world of Asia, Latin America, Fordist production methods became indigenized, whilst at the same time, in Africa, with the exception of perhaps South Africa and Mauritius, merchant capitalism in the form of trading capital and crude mineral extraction techniques remain the modus operandi of Homo economicus in Africa. So this failure of merchant capital to transform itself Well, I've just been told I have 3 minutes. Yeah. Okay. This failure of margin capital to transform itself in industrial capitalism, it remains the Gordinian note of African development. Okay, so in the paper, what I did is to go on to look at the divide, then the case of information science and the preservation of knowledge, and to look at higher education, and to argue that Africans continue, like other people and other areas, continue to produce knowledge, but in many cases, this knowledge is appropriated by other people. I mean, there's the example I picked up from YouTube when an artist who died recently called Geraldo Pino, one of his drummer came on and was saying, well, do you know that James Brown actually visited West Africa several times to pick up new genre for his own type of music? But of course, often we don't think about that kind of connection. We always think about the historical connections that was exported. Okay. So the question for me, the most important point, is how Africa's knowledge from Africa is preserved with some degree of permanence, because we're moving away from paper production to electronic production, which is permanent, which one could have access to. Okay, so to achieve that, as I said, I'll just go to the conclusion. I've said the first thing is that national, regional, and continental actors should come together to ensure the task of preserving local knowledge, and that should be utmost in their project. Regional cooperation is only second to national grouping in ensuring knowledge preservation. Collaboration with overseas professional academic organizations where funding is often readily available should be pursued. This is true with, as I've pointed out, relations with the African Studies Association and the journals like the Review of African Political Economy, Africa, also published in Britain, African Affairs, and Journal of Modern African Studies, etc. There is need also for legislation to safeguard data relating to individuals from being abused by individuals and groups. African states will have to invest in areas of energy generation to prevent frequent power cuts, which are a serious problem for those involved in knowledge preservation. There is need for a continental-wide policy on ICT in order to guide ICT infrastructural development. Competition should be promoted among providers to prevent the complacency and lethargy of monopoly. African governments cannot be expected to deliver the infrastructural needs to reduce the digital gap. New partners will have to be looked for in order to form kind of private-public partnership. Finally, to deal with the internal urban-rural division, it has been suggested that the states should be encouraged to install more telephone landline and internet lines across the urban-rural divide, thereby improving universal access. I'll leave it there.
Gary Rosenberg is the director of the Human Sciences Research Council Press. It is based in South Africa. It is a press that, amongst other things, allows for free access to information via open access electronic publishing. And he is going to be speaking to some of this that he does through his paper, which is entitled, so I don't have the titles of the papers right here in front of me. I'm trying to get them from memory. It is about repositioning the social science journal as well.
No, it's
Publishing.
social science publishing.
Social science publishing.
In the digital age, yeah.
In the digital age. Please, Gary. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I want to start off with a really elementary point. And it's that in terms of publishing, not only social science publishing, but that whole cultural field at the moment is going through a rate of change which we haven't seen for a long time, a very, very long time. And interestingly, the recent financial market crisis in most of the world has almost accelerated it. So this year, for example, you go to the London Book Fair and everyone's speaking about innovation. And as tends to happen, crises accelerate change. So we are at this moment where things are changing much more than the past probably, I don't know how many decades. And within periods of change, it's normally very useful to reconsider what your fundamental principles are. What are the things that don't change, that cannot change, that we can't afford to change? And the one principle for us is what we term the access principle. It's been described by Walensky, for example, who's written extensively on the topic, as a commitment to the value and quality of research carries with it the responsibility to extend and circulate the work as far as possible, and ideally to all who are interested in and who might profit from it. So this is not circumscribed in terms of your peers, other academics, it's all who can profit from it. And there are other examples of this finding expression. For example, the classical one would be the Alexandria Library in the 3rd century BC. Also some of the great mosque libraries, particularly the one in Cairo in the 16th century, which had exactly the same principle underlying it. And even more contemporary, we find that, for example, a key journal called Nature, when they launched in 1896, their big aim was to place before this is their description, place before the general public the grand results of scientific work and scientific discovery, and to urge the claims of science to a more general recognition in education and general life. My suggestion is that stays the same. We've seen it 300 years BC, we still have it now. It's not going to change with the internet. And it hasn't been invented by Google either, although they speak very much the same language. But in a current society where we have fast-changing ITC technology changes, everyone's talking about digitization, the context has changed quite radically. So the articulation of this changes. The principle doesn't change, but the articulation changes. And I remember in the 90s, people spoke about this death of the book, death of the printed book. I remember Microsoft saying by 2010, we would not be using printed books anymore. The CEO of Microsoft stood up and said that. Yeah, they do get it wrong sometimes. But besides the big extravagant claims, it had made significant change. And one is at the operations level, as we've heard before, just how one goes about putting a publication together. Another is at the content management and manipulation. And then there's also the marketing, and the fourth one is at the level of content delivery, which is the side that interests me the most. Now, there is a danger. I mean, somebody mentioned, one of the speakers mentioned earlier that South Africa is an exception. It's part an exception. It's sort of a two-nation state. There is a danger in applying what Thompson, for example, calls the technological fallacy. You can describe the technological fallacy as a view of the world where technology drives social change. And with that comes a preoccupation with the latest developments in technology, and you assume that that is going to set the pace for change. It doesn't always work that way. Primarily because there are often lots of other things that influence and constrain change. In the case of the book, for example, is the actual artifact, the emotional attachment, the material conditions, the fact that it's a highly portable, very successful technology which has been hugely underrated. And in a country like South Africa, to use as an example, where you have this thing of the two-nation state, it's, in a way you can say there's a small elite developed world and a large developing world. One of the dangers in merely taking this kind of approach is that you could actually reinforce the social inequalities. So, piggybacking on, just to give you a stat, internet access in South Africa, it's enjoyed by about 5 million people, or there's 5 million connections, but most of those connections are often counted 3 times. So one, like myself, for example, I'd have 3 connections: home, office, and my cell phone, which is not uncommon. So I'd be 3 people in that count. So it's a population of 48 million, but there's 5 million connections. And as I said, most of them are double counts. So it's not a huge proportion. And it puts into perspective when one speaks about the transformatory power of the internet, that you're really speaking to a segment. Within our context, within the African context, you're speaking to a privileged elite segment. So to take it on wholeheartedly and to use the internet as a driver for social change, it's very risky. The other point I wanted to get to is the notion of the publishing field. Essentially, the publishing field is it's from Bourdieu. It's a structured space of social positions, and it changes in different places. So there isn't one publishing field globally. There are publishing fields. One of the key things is infrastructure, as was mentioned earlier. We know that the big players in internet innovation are now looking at differentiating their business models. So YouTube, for example, are now going into YouTube Lite for the developing world, whereas the developed world will get the sort of full Monty. And the simple reason is that the business model doesn't work in our context. The band access, the broadband, is too expensive because you need too many servers to get the same bandwidth. That's number one. And number two is the revenue you generate is much less because people have less money, obviously, particularly when you're measuring it in dollars. So those two things make for an unsustainable business model, and it's four big players are already considering that and saying that it's not working in the developing country, and they most often cite India, which has got wide, sort of fast spreading and growing internet access, but not commercialization on the internet. So from a supply side, this is not such a big problem. So for example, our organization, we buy bandwidth from Europe, where we can get a terabyte which is cheaper than getting 10 gigabytes in South Africa. So that's quite simple, you just place it somewhere else. But on the demand side, it's a significant problem, because it means you're producing stuff, regardless of whether the intention's bad or good. You're producing stuff, but the access within your geographical area is limited. So it could lead to a crisis of access as opposed to production, which takes one to the conclusion that we could become producers for someone else, which is not an ideal situation when you're trying to develop African scholarship. Okay, I'm going to just move on quickly. The other aspect of that I just want to raise is within a field there's various forms of capital, and a key one is symbolic capital. And this is the kind of thing like the prestige value that you attach to a publication. The symbolic capital is quite important in the whole academe because it determines how people get rewarded, for example. The value of having one publisher's imprint on your book as opposed to another, or which journal you publish in. And the important thing here is that just getting something onto the internet, it means only that. It means that it's on the internet. it doesn't mean that it entered some global field or space of scholarship, because different elements would have different symbolic capital. And in setting up a press, I mean, I remember going through the setting up phases and getting a North American distribution. People would say things like, you need an American address, otherwise no one's going to read your stuff here. You know, don't just put down Africa, because it's not going to be seen as proper scholarship. That doesn't change in the internet age. For me, the internet's an infrastructure. Power relations are just manifested in it. And the power relations are often grounded in a very different reality. For example, the gender that Pinky mentioned. It will find expression in this new communication infrastructure, much as the differences in the power relations within global scholarship will find expression there. And that is a big challenge for me, because as we become, as I mentioned earlier, production becomes easier, so we might be producing more. Consumption doesn't become that easier, but we're still operating within the same power structure. And just to do this sort of alarmist foresight thing, there is a danger that you could be looking at producing a almost ghettoized scholarship on the internet. And for me, that is the ultimate danger. And the notions of, the underlying notions of the power imbalances is something that still needs to be addressed in other forums. We shouldn't expect the internet to transform that. Okay, just to conclude, essentially, for me, the notion of scholarly publishing, which was traditionally the preserve of associations, institutions, and then probably from the 70s became largely commercialized, leading to a crisis of access with higher journal subscriptions, and we all know those stories. It went through that moment, and it seems as if we're now going through a new moment, and we need to manage it carefully and not have unrealistic expectations, which would lead us to not address the material underlying power differentiation. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Gary. Our next speaker is Dr. Dominique Babini. Dominique is coordinator of the web-based journal for Clarksville. Her name is not up there, but she is going to be speaking to us on opportunities and challenges of the social science journals on the web, very much continuing the kind of discussion that Gary has just started us on.
Well, we're here. Thank you very much. Only a very short presentation. From Latin America, it's a region where we are seeing that internet is growing use within universities, and students and professors from their own home access or community telecenters, and how we are taking advantage of this to disseminate research results. We are a network of 250 social science institutions in 21 countries of Latin America. We have 10 years of experience using the web for dissemination of research results. We do it in open access because research is mainly funded with public funds and international funds, which allow open access dissemination. Which are the main difficulties for access to the printed version of the publications? Usually, a social science journal in Latin America has 300 copies. Printed academic book has 500 copies. These copies are not distributed largely because postage is the cost of postage is higher than the cost of the book. And so there's no interlibrary loan among cities or among countries. And we have a great discontinuity in journals publishing because of lack of funds, and in journals purchased in the libraries also because of lack of funds. So when internet arrived and the web arrived, some 10 years ago, we started using the digital version of the working document or the book or the journal which arrived to our institutions. We used it to start e-publishing and e-libraries. We are starting to see online management of publishing in Latin America, mainly using Open Journal System, the open software developed by British Columbia University and Simon Fraser University. And we are seeing digital libraries developed with the Greenstone open source software developed in New Zealand and the DSpace open source software and e-prints. We see these developments to disseminate papers and journals. We are seeing in Latin America institutional websites for the journals. Each journal has its own website, but these same journals are sent to digital libraries, but mainly to portals. Latin America, we share Spanish and Portuguese. We share social, political, and economic problems. We share the same difficulty to purchase journals, and we share the same difficulties to publish printed journals. So we have a common set of problems. So we started nearly 8 years ago. We started 10 years ago, but then two other portals, Cielo and Redalic, started 8 years ago. Cielo is an agreement with the national research councils of the different countries of Latin America to select peer-reviewed journals and publish them in open access. Redalic is an agreement directly with the journal publishers of peer-reviewed journals, also to publish open access. And Claxo is our portal. We publish also books and working documents. These three portals provide open access to social science research results. We do it since many years, and we do it to provide universities with update collections of social science publications in open access. The typical journal website in Latin America provides access to the contents, but with no search facility. The search facility is usually provided by the journal portals. This is our portal. We provide access to 84 journals from 19 countries, and we use the Greenstone software, the open access free software, and so we can provide facilities to search within the full text or in the metadata. A recent survey we want to share with you. We did a survey on 225 journals from 18 countries of Latin America, mainly published by universities and research NGOs. The interesting thing is nearly 70% of these journals are offered open access, the full text in the web, and 15% of these journals alone are only available in digital formats. In Latin America, we are seeing coming back many journals which had been left and not published anymore in the printed format. Now they are coming back in the digital format because they are sustainable in that way. What results are we having? The three portals, journal portals, not counting the individual journal websites, the three portals we're having nearly 6 million downloads a month of articles. That means we are having impact, we're having visibility. We still don't know how to measure the impact because Cielo and Redalic, which are the multidisciplinary portals, are building bibliographic systems, statistics, because we want to build in Latin America a new way to measure knowledge production and impact, not from social science citation index. I mean to complement social science citation index because it's very difficult to be in that club, so we want to build new indicators. And we are going to manage to do it, but we need some time yet. This is a typical HTML presentation of a journal. We have low bandwidth in Latin America at the domestic use, so we need to present the articles in HTML, and we also present the PDF. And all these initiatives are covered by Creative Commons licenses, which do not allow commercial use. And which are the pending issues? The pending issues is, we see the last years of the journals published in the web. We need to digitize the full collections, all the years of the journals. We need to stress the importance of publishing one PDF for each article and not one PDF for the complete journal, for complete number, because this is not good for low bandwidth. We need to stress the importance to put metadata in each article and to say how to cite each article, because in the web we have 250 million PDFs, so if you don't mention how to cite the PDF, it cannot be used in the academic context in developing or developed countries. We have to provide always search facility in the journal website, and we have to be prepared for harvesting. We have to use the Open Access Initiative protocol, so we can be harvested and we can harvest. We have to do a lot more preservation, digital preservation. We take the backup to our homes, but it's not the good situation. Yes, I am finishing, thank you. And we have to speak of sustainability. Only in my country, Argentina, we spend $5 million a year to purchase developed country journals for our universities. And we offer our journals in open access. So I think we should follow the example of South Africa. We have to offer open access, but we have also to try to sell our digital collections with the big distributors worldwide. That will allow us sustainability, because we have to help regions where internet access is very bad to receive this information we have in digital formats in CD-ROMs, so we can do that distribution with funds from sales. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dominique. Our next speaker is John Crowley. John Crowley is Chief of Section and Chief Editor of the International Social Sciences Journal. He has a background in ethics of science and technology. He's a Senior Program Specialist at UNESCO and Unpaid Executive Director of CIR, where he also heads the Research Policy Department. John is going to be speaking to us this morning about the ISSJ experience, the International Social Science Journal experience, continuing that track of experiential knowledge sharing and what we can learn from that. Thank you, John, please.
Thank you. Some of that biographical information is again not entirely up to date, but that doesn't really matter. It's off the internet. I'll have more to say about this. And while when I had to put together an abstract in about 7 minutes, I took the easy option of saying the experience of the International Social Science Journal. As you will see, I'll actually be talking about rather different things for two reasons. First, because the International Social Science Journal doesn't actually have much relevant experience in this area, simply because we haven't been very creative yet in adapting to the internet age. And secondly, because some of the things that I find more interesting and more important, which actually overlap quite a lot with things that have been said by previous speakers, are not really specific to the International Social Science Journal, though I suppose that the experience of editing an international, interdisciplinary, multilingual journal, and multilingualism is one of the key challenges we face, and one that we have difficulty coping with at the moment, will inevitably colour much of what I have to say about the age of internet generally. What I suggest we keep in mind is the expression which is in the title of this session, the age of internet. In other words, it's not just about internet. And here I think Gary's point is very important, that internet per se is just an infrastructure. There are issues of how that infrastructure impacts on academic knowledge production and dissemination, as well as issues about how the age of internet synchronizes with other ages that are perhaps more important for our consideration than the technical questions of internet itself. One consequence of this is that it's far from obvious that internet should be thought of primarily as a new and perhaps better way of doing old things. Maybe it's more appropriate in the age of internet to ask some fundamental questions about what academic publishing is for and how it should operate, keeping in mind the fact that it's quite a recent invention. It hasn't always existed. Again, Gary referred to Bourdieu. Bourdieu is one of the sociologists who's written a history of the process by which science became professionalized, including social science. This happened quite recently, in the mid to late 19th century. And the professionalization of publishing and new modes of academic publishing, along with new structures for the university, were central to it. Prior to that, science had developed powerfully, effectively, and dynamically without anything we would currently recognize as scientific publishing. Newton didn't publish in peer-reviewed journals. Galileo didn't go to conferences. It didn't stop them reshaping our understanding of how the world works. And quite possibly, one consequence not just of internet, but of the age of internet and a range of other processes partly synchronized with it, might be to bring to an end a historical parenthesis of great importance, where the figure of the editor and the figure of the publisher, along, of course, with the figure of the librarian, were absolutely central to academic knowledge production. Maybe their role isn't essential, and maybe they will need in due course to be provided with a first-class burial, full honors, and gratitude for services rendered. This led me to try and ask some questions about what publication is for with respect to academic knowledge production. And that led me to 4 kinds of functions that are different, separable, all in a process of change, all affected by internet, but not necessarily in the same ways, at the same places, and with the same possible implications. First of all, publication, academic publication, as any kind of publication, is a way to make results and ideas, to make the output of the process of thought available to an indefinite audience. It's the very definition of publishing that the audience should be indefinite, in the sense that the process by which the material is made available is not tied to distribution to anyone in particular. There are grey areas here, of course. Some kinds of newsletters are designed for a very specific audience, but insofar as they are published, they are at least in principle made available to anyone. And indeed, most countries have rules of legal availability of documents that guarantee that even things produced for a specific audience in a very specific communitarian network must be available to everyone. In France, for instance, all published documents must be deposited at the French National Library. The same thing exists in the US in the Library of Congress, the same thing in the UK via the British Library. So the indefinite nature of the audience is essential to the very nature of publishing. Secondly, by making knowledge available, publication makes possible ongoing public and scientific debate, without which scientific validation protocols wouldn't work. In other words, publishing contributes to the market of ideas. It's not the only way in which the market of ideas functions. Conferences are a good example of one other way in which ideas may be confronted, argued, debated, rejected, validated, without the use of publication, since conferences, by their very nature, are in principle available not to an indefinite audience, but to a definite audience, those who've paid the registration fee. Though, of course, internet offers new opportunities for different kinds of conferences that may be available, in principle at least, to an indefinite audience. In this respect, publication is part of the process of quality control within academic knowledge production. Third, publication provides the basis, and in particular the material basis, not necessarily the institutional basis, for an archive of knowledge, ideas, etc., that ensures that even things that no one can see a use for, but are potentially useful to some indeterminate future project, are maintained and kept alive for anyone who might possibly use them. Publishing makes this possible in a material sense by producing the things that can be archived, but it does not necessarily itself archive anything. That historically has been the function of libraries. This may be changing, partly because the material basis is itself changing, and partly because publishers are increasingly taking on some of the functions of knowledge archiving, especially when they see commercial benefit therein, that have historically been the preserve of libraries. And fourth, the publishing process shapes the knowledge production process itself. Editors and publishers have traditionally had an active role, and not simply a passive role, in favoring the development of certain kinds of knowledge production over other kinds. They have encouraged people to write about certain things in a certain way, either by the direct creative role of major editors. Think, for instance, of the fact that we have an entire school of history called the Annales School, the school of the longue durée, as developed originally by Lucien Febvre and Marc Bloch. And Annales was the name of the journal they founded. They created a school by founding a journal. We all dream of doing this. Very few of us actually succeed. But many journal founders have the dream of creating something like the Annales School, which again is an indication that the collective project around an intellectual idea may contribute not simply to disseminating the ideas, but actually to changing the way in which they are produced in the first place, because of the way in which academic publishing, and in particular the role of editors, is embedded within academic institutions and spills over into the non-publishing side of the functioning of an academic institution, in particular to teaching, of course. This entails, and this was the point of my earlier reference to Bourdieu, that a certain idea of publication is connected to a certain idea of what an academic knowledge production is and should be. And one would expect changes in one to affect changes in the other. Which way the causality goes is something that we can keep for the discussion. Let me summarize, for the purposes of presentation, these four functions by four key words: access, debate, archive, and incentives. I don't like the last one, but I couldn't find anything better. You see the point, since I've just summarized it. How does Internet affect each, if at all? Access. This has already been referred to and is obviously a very important point. What seems to me most striking is that Internet shifts costs around. Whether it reduces the overall cost of the knowledge dissemination process is arguable, but it certainly locates different kinds of costs in different places and produces a new economic model that has some important implications, since it is of the nature of Internet, and Gary just emphasized this correctly and strongly, to make infrastructure central. Access to any particular piece of knowledge may become nearly free, technically, unless there are economic barriers and legal barriers put in place by someone with control over the knowledge in question. But the condition for that free access to bits of knowledge is investment, possibly considerable investment, in infrastructure. And this is at several points of the chain. The first development, I think, had nothing to do with Internet and everything to do with personal computing. You may remember the time when academic publishing started to shift an increasing proportion of the technical cost of manuscript production onto authors in the early 1990s, before anyone really used Internet outside the US. But the notion of camera-ready copy predates Internet. It was a first aspect of the way in which technological change enabled publishers to shift costs that were previously internal to publishers, since manuscripts were prepared by professionals, onto authors, with typically problematic consequences for the technical quality of academic publications, since the standard of what is considered to be professionally publishable is gradually drifted down from the traditional standards of professional publishers to not even the best you can do with the software produced by Microsoft, but the average level of competence of a typical academic with Microsoft word processing software, which is pretty low, as you know. But of course there are costs at other levels too, including the cost of printing, which is shifted onto the end user. We make available the PDF file. If you can read it on screen, if you're the kind of freak who can actually read on screen large amounts of material, then fine, you do it. But if you want to print it, as most people do, then you invest in the printer, you pay for the cartridges, you pay for the paper. The cost hasn't disappeared, it's been shifted. And at least temporarily, this is making traditional publishers rich. Publishing margins have undoubtedly increased considerably by shifting costs onto authors and end users. This is probably transitory, and publishers know it. What the implications are for the overall economic process is an open question. With regard to debate, clearly internet has expanded the scale of debate. It has led to an erosion of reciprocity, particularly through the practices of anonymity or quasi-anonymity on internet, and therefore possibly to a certain loss of trust and loss of the capacity of public debate to serve as a collective endeavor oriented towards truth. And yes, Jürgen Habermas, I'm thinking of you, in ways that have probably not been adequately studied sociologically. In addition, internet introduces uncertainties about quality control, since the availability of something is no guarantee that anyone has given it any kind of imprimatur, particularly as these things are very easy to fake in the internet age. If any of you attended the very interesting presentation in the research integrity session yesterday by Ben Martin on a serial cheater, someone who made a lucrative 30-year career out of cheating with fake CVs, plagiarized articles, non-existent institutional affiliations and so on, you can see two very interesting things. First, internet makes this kind of thing easier to detect, and secondly, it makes it much easier to do. Whether the arms race between detection and cheating is to the benefit of one or to the other is still unclear at this stage. With regard to the archive, it is undoubtedly broader, easier to access technically, much easier to use, particularly in terms of text-based searching and hypertext functions. It is also, and this is something that was referred to earlier with the reference to rock carvings, which I think is a very important and salutary remark that we don't take sufficiently seriously, it is a very fragile archive because it is technology dependent, which means, among other things, it is system dependent. There is no guarantee that any of our current data will be readable in 30 years' time unless we can guarantee continuity of the systems that make it readable, by which I mean not just the hardware but also the software. The sheer fragility of digital data considered as a social product is something that professional librarians and knowledge managers are very worried about, but that the general public, including the general academic public, is not particularly sensitive to. How about the incentives? I confess I don't really know, and the evidence is primarily anecdotal. Microsoft was undoubtedly wrong to say that the book was dying, but the question whether the book is under particular pressure as a mode of academic expression, which is something that has great importance in the social sciences and is currently provoking a major debate in Europe, is, I think, an open and valid question. Internet best suits article-based publication in terms of length, format, process, and the logic of dissemination. It is much less well suited to the production of book-length arguments, not least because book-length arguments typically require a different kind of editorial process that internet self-publishing definitely doesn't provide, and that internet publishing might find it increasingly difficult to provide, particularly if the products then can't be sold. Now, there's no evidence so far of a crisis of the book. In the quantitative sense, more social science books. I now have 0 minutes left. More social science. That's a very polite way of saying shut up. More social science books are probably being produced than ever before, but whether this is sustainable is a question that might be worth discussing. And this isn't primarily about internet, you note. And it may have some consequences about the way in which social science is produced. Just let me say this in one word. And maybe this is a very French view, but being based in France, I'm sensitive to the French view. Many people are convinced within certain paradigmatic conceptions of what social science involves that privileging journal articles over books actually debases social science by reducing it all to economics. And in the mouths of the people I'm paraphrasing, this is not a compliment. Okay, I should stop there. I had a few more details to say about costs, but maybe we can come back to that. My time is up. Thank you.
Many thanks indeed, John. We have a discussant who is going to help us pull the different threads together and signal perhaps areas that we may want to come back to, questions that arise. And he is Suleiman Adebowale. Suleiman, please, 5 to 7 minutes, and then we will open up for discussion.
I think it's if you don't mind me sitting down here because I've got the notes on my computer, so I'll just go straight. Yeah, it's okay. We've had a very rich and diverse discussion from the panelists, and from looking at it from various angles and perspectives. We've had case studies from the first, second, and third world and fourth world. We've had experiences from different aspects of publishing, journals and books, and we've also had experiences from various actors in research publishing, or various actors in knowledge production, publishers, scholars, research centers. And the common thread across all discussions, I will pick three, and I'll pick those three from Imtiaz Ahmed's discussion, which is accessibility, location, and sustainability. What is certain, and which Gary also mentioned and noted in Gary's paper, is that there's this, knowledge production started with this inherent notion of dissemination, of disseminate knowledge, of disseminate scholarship. And but the discussion now in research publishing, the notion is access. We can say the discussion has moved towards much more of access than of dissemination, and that could be seen in all the questions around what John noted as well, in terms of by shifting with the changes of brought about by the use of the internet in the production process, in the production and delivery process, and dissemination process for scholarly material, for any material in publishing. So you now shift the cost of delivery. You transform the way you do it. You transform the format of what you produce. In the long run, the question now will now remain, rather than the access being a case of walking into a bookshop to buy a book or to buy any material, will now move to clicking something, and in other words, living in a country with infrastructural facilities for you to be able to access the material, being able to click, being able to download, having the right bandwidth to have the right form of data. It's access becomes an issue, and in the last few years, all the discussions around whether how to make this issue of access profitable, because that's the bottom line in terms of so the old notions about open access, about publishers not wanting to go into open access, about scholarly community demanding open access, about all the questions around what you will gain from having open access, other ways of looking at making money when you embark on open access, and other ways of generating funds for your research institute when you have open access. All of it is all, we are still talking about access. So I will leave access alone. Then I may talk about the term location. And he noted that the internet provides opportunities for localizing the global as much as globalizing the local. And John talked about the debate. The debates, how publishing provided that forum for debate, for different perspectives and views, and being able to shape the discourse and directions and shape schools of thought. And we all know of what we could gain from that. But we also know of how we could fall from that as well. And the classic anecdote for us was the information we could be able to gather on each of the panelists, and how the information turned out to be now obsolete. Which brings to questions like, when you walk into a bookshop and you pick up a book, and obsolete information, you can glean what's an obsolete information by checking the dates, the date of publication, for example. But in the instance where we now have a wealth of information out there, and control of what is up to date, what is when it was published, who it was qualified, who is the person that published it, was it peer review, was it not peer review, and everything, and it's still not standardized. In terms of the models around, it's not standardized across board. We know there are models to use to present the right form of publication online and all that. If you want to give it the same level of prestige or level of authority, in the case of our discipline, scholarly publishing, which books and which printed material gave scholars. There have been processes on how to do that and how to format that, and what tags to use and what meta tags to use in your electronic document. But all these standards are not yet across board. So we still have this fluidity in knowledge that is placed digitally, that is out there electronically, and our relationship with this knowledge is shifting and is being called into question every time, as John rightly pointed out. Quality of the debate and however. Another thing is sustainability. How can this thing be sustained? Ahmed talked about the stone, how the stone, from the stone to the papyrus and all that, and how those stones still stay. And we are currently still fighting over which DVD format is going to remain. We don't know. Remember when we used to use Betamax video cassettes? Remember all those people whose collections of films disappeared because a certain provider of a certain format, a digital format, stopped producing that format. So all the issues around what is the role of institutions, of governments, of organizations in being part of the producers and controllers of technology for electronic publishing becomes critical. So if your work is archived by your university department, it makes slightly, it doesn't guarantee, because we know of the changes, the huge changes going on in higher education currently, and the transformations going on in the higher education administration. However, you feel less stressed than if the material is archived by a company, a private company, that might just decide to drop the entire product one day, and they might just decide to whether it's Google trying to gather all this material, that might decide to drop it one day and move to something else. All this is, so, and what does it mean to how do you sustain a situation where the internet is also perpetuating the same old demarcations, the same old divide, and the same old marginalization that we experience in other quote-unquote ages, and how this also affects, and Gary said something which is very interesting about South Africa being a two-nation state, and every part of the world is actually a two-nation state when it comes to digital technology, particularly for the internet. Saskin yesterday talked about when we talk about the mobile, we should also think of the e-mobile. And when she said that, I mean, there are millions of people right now who do not have access to the internet. And if we are going to concentrate solely on knowledge produced on the internet, which means a certain chunk of the human population is cut off. I mean, they don't have access to the internet for so many reasons. It could be, in the case of a first world, choice. It could be, for example, like me, I started using a mobile phone less than 2 years ago. So it could be, it could be lack of access, money to be able to have access to this. It could be lack of all those. However, a certain portion, but we could also move the argument further. But wait a minute, when books were printed and published, not everybody had access. You could, if you are not literate, you don't have access to the knowledge produced by the book. If you are not literate in a particular language that dominates publishing, knowledge publishing, which is English, in other words, you don't have access to that knowledge produced. We know of how all the questions about what we know is shaped by basically the language we speak, basically. And it's also the kind of the dominance of what we know is also shaped by the language we speak and with the language we use. How a certain chunk of human knowledge we don't have because we do not use that particular language, as we know. So many things are lost in translation. There are so many issues they mentioned, but I think these are just extracts of excerpts, if I can say. Thank you.
Thank you for your observations, Suleiman. Suleiman is also a publisher and director of an academic publishing company for Africa. I'm going to now open the floor up and ask you to please contribute in any whichever way, whether it's asking questions, observing, or talking from your experience to push these ideas forward. Solani, please. If you could kindly introduce yourself before you speak. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Solani Ngobeni. I'm a book publisher. And actually I have a budget for buying books at the end of every month. And before my son goes to bed, I read him books, not my laptop. John alluded to the publisher shifting costs, but I think I have a serious problem with this notion that electronic or internet publishing is necessarily a panacea, because as the HSRC publishing model has shown, and Gary has alluded to this, that I think we need to move beyond these binaries of print and electronic, because really, I mean, the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. And actually, the HSRC publishing model have shown that electronic publishing enhances the sale of hard copies of books. I take my books to bed, but I mean, I can't read. I don't read A Dream Deferred on my laptop in bed. I take the hard copy, and actually I bought the hardback, and it's more than 800 pages. The last point I want to make is the fact that, you know, while people tend to nowadays celebrate internet publishing, and maybe I'm biased because I'm a book publisher, so I read books and actually invest a lot of money in book publishing. Although, you know, you'd say that if the publisher shifted some of the costs now to the consumer, it's actually the last part, in the sense that we still pay for commissioning of books. And actually, before these things go to the internet, they need to be copy edited. They need to be set. They need to be designed, because at the end of the day, you need to print out this book. You know, so someone has to do work on this thing.
Okay, so then if you can.
Oh,
So
okay.
that we allow
Yeah.
the
So I would like any of you to maybe put more emphasis on the fact that, you know, the print does not necessarily, it's not necessarily mutually exclusive to the hard copy. And my son actually reads more of my books than my computer.
Thank you. We'll take a few more contributions from the floor before we come to the speakers, if there are any. No, Gary would like to talk back to the point raised by someone.
One of the things I always find interesting in people doing the book versus, let's say, PC reading, because most reading gets done off a PC anyway, is that the book almost, it's not recognized as a technology anymore. It's become so part of human culture that people don't see it as a technology, and ultimately it is a technology. And it's a highly refined one that has taken many, many years to get to where it is. And I think that in terms of like the Microsoft futuristic kind of bets that they placed, they underestimated just how powerful the technology is and what it will take to replace it. But so far nothing has come up that is overwhelmingly competing with it. The price performance of e-readers is just not there. It's about 5,000 rand to buy the reader, and then about $10, then about, you know, well, to use dollars, $10 to use to get a book. When you add it up, it's just not, you can't compare it to the actual physical thing. So I think that's one thing, that we start looking at the printed book also as a technology, and in many instances as a superior technology.
Can I say something also in response to that? I was describing, mainly for the purposes of this presentation, I certainly wasn't giving any view on desirable models, though I expressed some skepticism about some aspects of internet-based publishing. I agree with you that there is potential complementarity. What I would worry about is processes that tend to erode that complementarity. And my conviction, which I couldn't, I think, argue in any very detailed way on the basis of evidence, is that the default mode of internet publishing is currently disregarding complementarity, because it is shifting traditional products online rather than looking for the kinds of products and services that correspond to the logic of internet. To publish text on internet, even text nicely tarted up in PDF format, is a gross waste of the resources offered by web-based technology, and is probably doing few favors to the readers of text. As Gary correctly pointed out, we spent centuries developing the book, and there's a kind of Darwinian argument that evolution tends to produce high-performing products. We shouldn't drop it without checking that we're replacing it by something better. The logical unit of internet knowledge organization should be the resource, not the article, certainly not the journal. If you simply put journals online in their traditional form, they will die. Because what readers want are articles guaranteed by the imprint of quality control. They don't want journals. Journals will fragment into articles and a journal title, which they're already doing commercially. And once you go in that direction, logically, there's no reason to have fixed periodicity for publication. Publish articles when they become available. And then you're going in the direction of an internet-based resource which combines the right level of availability with the right kind of quality control. But of course, what people want online isn't articles, which they can get just as easily in print. They want the data. They want the interactive maps. They want the hypertext facilities. They want the updated bibliographies. They want the response, chat, comment functions. They want to participate in the community of debate around the output. All of these things exist to some extent, but these are what make the internet valuable, not the internet as a new kind of distribution system for the old kind of product. And I think if we are more creative in looking for the new kinds of resources that actually make use of the power of the new technologies, we will not only enhance certain aspects of social science knowledge production and dissemination, and the same would be true in other areas, but this is a social science conference, we will also preserve the space that needs to be preserved for our historically developed technology of books and journals that can continue to serve us well.
Before you do, let me just, coming back to what John has just said, and obviously with the background that what we have been presented with here is that the internet basically is a checkered landscape. If we are to follow the continuum that there is information and data leads to knowledge, at what point do we say what is knowledge on the internet? And also, I suppose also arises the question of definition with respect to social science in itself, because Imtiaz suggested that what we find on the internet is also social science research that is generated, for instance, by Osama bin Laden. And John is saying people are asking for articles. I would just like to hear what your notions of this whole area is with respect to definitions and what knowledge is and what social science research, as it were, can be said to be as we glean it through the internet. Thank you. You can start with your point, and then anybody who would like to take that one up can do that.
I just want to make 3 points. As I listened to the colleague from Latin America, I thought perhaps there's a lot we could learn from that, from an African perspective. But also, I must say that in Britain, in academia, we have a kind of jaundiced approach to the internet. For example, I know our students are dissuaded from using Wikipedia because of the question of authenticity and validation. And also, one big problem we have in Britain is plagiarism. and it comes from the internet mainly, not solely. It comes from books as well. And it's all over the universities. I mean, the other day, Liverpool University Vice Chancellor was up in arms, talking about that. Then also, I was marking an essay once, and it took me to an internet site where apparently they sell essays. Yeah. And I was shocked this student led me to that, because the question I asked, what was she doing, or was it a he? What was he doing there? So I just handed that to what we call the plagiarism czar. He's a guy who deals with that because he's got the software. Then also, I mean, the thing about dualism, I did mention dualism in Africa between the rural and the urban area. Then I think there's an interesting point that Gary made I just want to draw attention to, because Gary said I think he calls it the French perspective about valorizing books over journals. And again, I think that's great, because books really are sustainable activity as opposed to journal pieces. But in Britain right now, thanks to the RA, it seems to me, I don't know, I mean, other British academics are here, it seems to me that the emphasis is moved towards refereed journal articles. Because, I mean, this is where they're putting the emphasis in terms of ratings. And, of course, it depends on, the position of that journal in the rating. So I just wanted to raise those 3 points.
Okay. Suleiman, please.
Yeah. Zach started something, a very, very important trend, which is that even with advances in the internet and internet publishing, and electronic publishing as a whole, and what doesn't help the case, what Umi gathers great for is that the model of operation of other areas of our lives as scholars remain the same. In the sense, it's funny in the sense that because for example, because various disciplines, for example, have certain perception to what constitutes value in their discipline, and various disciplines have different, whether it's journals, whether it's books, whether it's monographs, whether it's or which type of journals. Is it the journals in the social sciences, SEI, Social Science Citation Index, which the Latin American case is trying to tackle by developing their own index, or is it so now it's until for example we are clear cut about what value is attached to a particular format of the knowledge we are producing as scholarly publishers, and that is accepted and valued in the particular community we are working with, will determine its acceptance or rejection in an electronic format, or whether we should consider journal publishing is it's in a way journal publishing, we could say, has benefited more from the internet than book publishing, in terms of the whole notion of immediacy of access to material which you need for your work right now, and why you want to have it, why you want to be able to click that particular journal, that article, pick pieces from, see who has cited that particular journal article. So all those, which in a way the when you are, that is why the current, those who make money from electronic publishing right now are mainly journal publishers. I mean, basically, because that is where you can get money from, because, and also people want one particular article
by shifting the cost of printing to
so
the end user.
Yeah. So it's the way we operate in higher education has a huge impact on how we go in electronic publishing versus what I was just trying to draw out.
Yeah. On condition it's sustainable. Sorry,
Okay.
it's for the
Thank
chair
you.
to decide who gets to speak.
Thank you very much. Let me find out if there's anybody from the floor who would like to say anything before I come back to the panel to give them the space to give their last few words. If not, the idea of trading in knowledge, I mean, trading in knowledge is a very serious thing that the internet is making very easy. And of course it works on the wheels of the asymmetries that have already been mentioned by the various panelists. Where, for instance, you have websites like academiaresearch.com, gradesaver.com, even SparkNotes. You can buy an essay, but the other side to this is actually that these websites, they use the internet to act as the middleman. They buy essays from scholars, and these essays, once they have paid off the scholar, you've lost your copyright and everything, and then they sell the essay to another scholar who, I suppose, would be of the sort who makes their lives, their career basically based on 30 years of attributing things that they have not produced to themselves. And it's a big problem, particularly for African researchers who get paid peanuts, and these sites basically pay you for just one article, probably what you would earn in 2 months, for instance. And so it is a big problem in that the very asymmetries that we would have imagined the internet would help us curb actually get to be accentuated even further. And so the question becomes how to overcome, how do we go beyond this? I'm going to now throw it all back to the panel, starting with Gary on my side, and we'll go all the way back to John and finish off with Dominic, please. Last words.
Okay, thanks. I won't be long. My favorite question is always, so what? And so what? The underlying thing for me is, what's the impact actually going to be on this thing we call social science knowledge? You know, it's not with the journals better than books and all of that kind of stuff. And if one formulates the argument that the infrastructure mediates the practice, and the practice influences the culture, and knowledge basically is a cultural construct, then it's not unthinkable that this new infrastructure will ultimately impact on how we think about social science knowledge, or the social sciences. And it's a bit scary when one considers that one day perhaps to Google will equal research, and things will be published, or things are published at the moment, as you mentioned with people's details, that require daily updates, as opposed to the traditional notion of publishing, or scholarly publishing at least, where you put out something that an argument, for example, that you think should be considered for at least 10 years, because that's your normal, when you're a publisher, you normally look at least 10 years for the lifespan of a book. So that argument should be relevant. It should be worth considering for at least that span of time, not a daily update. And if one looks at this infrastructure holistically, and sort of looks at the dark side, I guess the dark side would be that social science starts looking like lots of bits of information, and those bits of information is what people will then call knowledge.
Thank you.
Okay, now just a couple of points. I would go back to the issue of sustainability and bet on humans, mainly because this issue of sustainability currently may be problematic, but I don't think in the long term, I'm sure the humans would find a way out. Now, after all, humans did produce plastic, and plastic can stay for years, millions of years, in fact. And now we are, in fact, into a science where we are trying to get rid of the plastic, in fact, which is becoming problematic. So the issue here is the technology that you have with the internet now, yes, you have all the hard drive crash and all, but I think this can be solved, and it's possible. It's, at least one can imagine that it's possible, and you can come up with a technology which you can really keep in your hand, and which may look very A.G. Wellsian at this point of time, but I think that's possible. But what I think is the issue of social science knowledge and social science research in a different domain, because you now have a possibility of having an AV book, audiovisual book, because a book can be with with a lot of things together, with the sound, with the pictures, with the map, and that's a possibility, and that was never there, in fact, because to read one book earlier, you needed 20 books, or you need to go 20 places, but now you probably will not need to go there. So if you want to read a book on history of Europe, you can see picture of Europe and Hitler's pictures and Mussolini and all can come together, and then you can go on. And that's a possibility, and that's where I think it opens up a fascinating world. But then the fascinating world is also for Mr. OBL, Osama bin Laden, and that's the issue here, because after all, you need to interact, you need to confront that as well, because I think they probably would have a different agenda, and they have a different agenda altogether, and that is the more problematic and more, I think, is the fearful thing that the internet allows you. The book did not, in fact, because a book is not where you can have the technology of bomb making or explosive making in a way the internet allows you to do. And other things, the money laundering, and I can go on and on. The word subaltern globalization. You can do a lot of things simply by using the internet, and that is where I think the social scientists ought to, in fact, start thinking as to what can be done on that. Very quickly on the issue of business, I think business comes later, in fact. The innovation would continue. I don't think innovation, people would say, well, the business has taken over innovation, but not really. Sometimes the business actually limits innovation because they don't want to give up their profit, whatever they're trying to do. There is now a technology of making the entire Sahara green. The technology is there. It's only that, people would not invest it because it doesn't really help the countries which can invest, but the technology is there to make the entire Sahara green. So the issue here is I'm betting more on the humans' innovation, or as I said, the homo faber element of it, and that's the exciting part of it, and I think internet allows to do a lot of things, and we just need to continue and flow with that.
Basically, I think the debates come down now to the dichotomy between hard and electronic distribution. And in a way, I agree with Gary in the sense that for me, I tend not to read articles in the internet. I would rather print it and read rather than spend time scrolling. When I use the internet, usually it's for quick information like dates. But at the same time, I appreciate news groups where there are things being debated, because that's the only place, and I just find it that I don't have time to download something like that. But what my own concern has been actually in my paper is how we harness and store what I call African knowledge production. I mean, this is what I've been concerned about. I mean, I was thinking, for example, like the knowledge of the San people about aging, that multinationals, I gather, parachuted down South Africa, took that away with them, and, what was it, Namibia? Sorry. Hoodia, yeah. So, I mean, for me, this is the sort of thing, this is what I'm concerned about. How do we harness that, especially in a period when copyright is a major source of accumulation?
Thank you, Zach.
Thanks. Agreeing with much of what has been said, I'll take a slight tangent. Following on from Gary's remark about the technology driving the process, for 100 years or more, about 150 years, science, including social science in particular, has been driven and shaped by institutions. Science has become professionalized via universities, research councils, and so on. And what we think of as science, in other words, the collective social process by which ideas are filtered, validated, critiqued, rejected, subjected to test, and gradually incorporated into common knowledge, is consubstantial with those institutions. In the age of internet, partly because of internet, partly for unrelated reasons, institutions are under challenge. And whole paradigms have been produced, Web 2.0 and so on, which are precisely first premised upon and second directed at achieving forms of deinstitutionalization, putting the individual or the community or the grassroots first, and replacing institutions, in other words, deliberately designed mechanisms for ensuring certain purposes, by the emergent properties of interaction among non-coordinated groups of agents, or groups of agents coordinated only by technology, the shaping role of which they're not fully conscious. I think ultimately one of the key questions, which goes way beyond publishing and goes way beyond the internet per se and focuses really on the age of the internet, is whether this is good, bad, or indifferent. Gary's so what question is very relevant here. I'm not convinced that we should be sanguine about deinstitutionalization because I'm not entirely sure what the alternatives are. And the history of Wikipedia is interesting in this respect. Wikipedia, as you know, started out as a pretty radically anti-institutional process that is gradually becoming institutionalized. And the main reason is that those who created it and those who run it are conscious of the fact that their success brings responsibility and that without institutionalization they can't live with that responsibility.
Thank you, John. Dominic, please.
Yes, I think. Well, I was so concerned about the issue you raised, John. I think we have to strengthen institutional participation. I was thinking about our public universities in Latin America. Students don't buy books. They can't buy books in public universities, so they always study with photocopies. So the internet follows that fragmentation, you know. They see the photocopy of one chapter of the book. They never saw the book. Now they download a chapter of the book and they never see the complete book. I think institutions have to keep a role in controlling quality and selecting. As a professor selects the photocopies for the students, the institutions have to play a role with academic portals and metadata to help improve the quality of searching in the free web.
Many thanks indeed. Please join me in thanking our panel of speakers. They have given us quite a lot to think about. It is time now to drop out and have tea. Thank you.
Thank you. You have to take care of your cold.
Yeah.